On September 20th, 2019, the Link's Awakening remake was released for the Nintendo Switch. Going into the release, there were many people who were already planning on speedrunning the game due to the fact that there were already large communities for the previous installments of Link's Awakening. Upon the game's release, many tricks were quickly found by abusing the game's physics and collision. By October, we had already found a healthy amount of glitches. Some of these include Villa Skip, which skips the entirety of Canalit Castle before entering D3, and air climbing, which allows the player to clip out of bounds or climb up an invisible ladder with the rooster, gaining precious height. There were other potential roadblocks that we were trying to skip, such as skipping the walrus to get the angler key without the Mowering cutscene, or getting into D2 without Bow Wow. However, this video is not about how we achieved these hypothetical skips. This video is about a glitch that came seemingly out of nowhere and changed the game forever. Pretty much all of the tricks and skips that we found applied only to the overworld. While we had found many tricks using the rooster and fox, we couldn't bring them into any dungeon, so any glitches to be used within dungeons were much more difficult to find. The only tricks that were used within dungeons were small key skips in D4 and D5. This was about to change. It all started on October 9th, when a video was posted to the Zelda subreddit titled, "I accidentally found a glitch that lets you skip a decent portion of Eagle's Tower." Let's take a look at what was posted. It cannot be overstated how incredibly unlikely this was to happen to DrewBlank, the user who posted the video. I will go into more details later, but just to give some background, not only is this trick frame perfect to a 60th of a second, but it is also float perfect, with Link's X, Y, and Z coordinate to a millionth of a unit. We did not know this at the time, but what we did know is that if we could recreate this consistently, we could absolutely break the dungeon wide open. Once the Link's Awakening Discord got a hold of the video, there was a gold rush to replicate what we had all just seen. It wouldn't take long for people to get the invisible Link grab, however, controlling where you wanted to land was an entirely different story. 99% of the time, doing a Hinox Warp, or a Super Hinox throw as it was called at the time, ended up with Link spawning exactly where he was grabbed, or in a random room and location somewhere on the dungeon map. There was one big issue with trying to replicate this trick in Eagle's Tower, or D7, the fireballs. In addition to there being many holes that Link can fall into, there are also two torches that shoot fireballs at Link. The torches take a random amount of time to shoot the first fireball, but then shoots them at a consistent interval at Link. These fireballs made recreating the video on Reddit nearly impossible. Not only did we have to get the exact same timing with the fireballs as DrewBlank did, but we also needed to execute his movement in such a way that we get hit by the fireball in the exact same spot and same 60th of a second that the Hinox grabs us. There was also the possibility of finding an entirely new spot and setup for the warp, but the fireballs made this challenge a nightmare. This was apparent in the testing done by community members, and people began to think of other ideas. One runner, Nolan, thought to himself, "Hey, there's a Hinox at the start of Dungeon 8, and it doesn't have any pesky fireballs or holes. I wonder if we could do something there." 2 days later, on October 11th, this video was posted by Nolan getting a Hinox Warp without the use of any fireballs. This was a fairly important discovery, as it meant we no longer needed to use fireballs in D7 to achieve the glitch, giving the player much more versatility in how they set up the warp, and that the same glitch was also possible in D8. Due to how much easier it was to lab out the D8 Hinox, the community went to work. Now, you would think that a glitch as complicated and precise as this would take weeks, if not months, to properly control. Certainly, a consistent setup for such a wild glitch would take an extremely long time. But, later that very same day that Nolan posted his video, the Remake Glitches channel was onto something great. A glitch hunter by the name of SixPathsPanda warped from the D8 Hinox to the instrument room through trial and error testing. This is what it looked like. And now that we had a rough idea of what a good angle could look like, this started to happen later that very same day on October 11th. What you just read was no mistake. There were two consistent methods found to skip the entirety of the final dungeon of the game. They were found at the exact same time of the same day, 2 days after we first saw Drew Blank's Reddit video. Samurai Man, a legendary runner who you all know, along with SixPathsPanda, who had arguably spent the most time glitch hunting the trick, combined their knowledge to create this setup.
Huh?
This method was extremely fast as it warped Link directly to the final boss room. However, myself, alongside a user named Kincaid, discovered an alternate method of doing the exact same thing, but with completely different applications. While our method was a bit slower, it was ultimately utilized later on for a way to get the magic rod early and also to get the heart piece in the dungeon quicker. Let's take a look. Guys, it's so easy. It's so easy. There's a few spots where you can fall, but it's really not that hard. Boom, bada bing. It's literally... Alright, so you move to the right all the way. It stops you. You can't move to the right anymore. So you just move right all the way. Then, once you move right, move up. Then, if you move back down to the next to the Hinox room, you will void out. You need to inch down slowly. So right about here. You're gonna hit in a little invisible wall in the corner, but then Link will kind of walk around it like this, like that. Then you want to keep moving left until Link's hat is barely visible, like that. That's good. Then move up. You might get a little hiccup there, but that's fine. Boom. Then you do this, and then you do this, and this blew my mind when I did it. Bada bang. Then you just walk left. And then go up. And then you go up. And bada fucking bing, boys. That's how you do it. D8 skip, easy as hell, guaranteed. Boom. Now that we could Hinox Warp directly to the instrument room, the time it took to complete D8 was brought down by roughly 8 minutes, since we could enter the Hinox room immediately after entering the dungeon. Before this story continues, however, I have a special guest who is going to explain the mechanisms of a Hinox Warp. The guest is none other than Kincaid, a legend in our community who has his name on practically every single major discovery. He has been around since the beginning and was very hard at work this whole time trying to find useful angles during this experimentation period. Without him, this game would certainly not be where it is today.
Hey everyone, thank you Adamo for that introduction, that was very flattering. So, the Hinox Warp, for as strange and precise of a trick as it is, we actually know a surprising amount about it. Firstly, to perform a Hinox Warp, you have to get grabbed by the Hinox and have something interrupt that grab state. Most people think that you have to get damaged on the same frame, but that's actually not true. There are other interactions that can interrupt the grab state, such as clanking a fireball with your shield in D7 on the same frame, or falling down one of the pits in the room in D7 on the same frame. Now, normally when you're grabbed, Link is teleported to and attached to the Hinox's right hand, and the game is told to stop updating his coordinates, so the game considers his coordinates to be basically where he was before he was last grabbed. However, if you interrupt that grab state, the game re-enables regular coordinate updates, which the Hinox hand attaching does not like, and it creates a feedback loop which basically sends Link's coordinates completely haywire and makes him teleport all over the place. And yes, he is teleporting, hence the name of the trick. Originally, it was thought that the Hinox Warp was actually a zip, meaning that Link was going very fast and clipping through walls and all that good stuff. It was assumed that the grab state amplified or locked the knockback velocity and angle from the fireball or bomb arrow, and that Link was traveling in a straight line in that direction at a very fast speed and screen wrapping at the edges of the map or warping down at the edges of the map or something. We assumed there was some sort of screen wrapping mechanic because occasionally he would reappear in the room for a brief moment, when in reality that is not what was happening at all. And we know this because people in the community like Captain Kiwi and Leo tracked the coordinates of Link in real time and graphed them out. It's actually pretty interesting. Link moves in this sort of spiral shape at first before just going completely insane, and we know that he's warping while doing all this because during this time his speed value is 0. The game does not consider him to be moving in a traditional sense. He's warping all over the place on all axes. There's actually photos of Link like appearing close to the camera in some sort of rotated position, so it also affects his actual like yaw and roll. It's really strange, but it definitely has some sort of logic behind it, otherwise it wouldn't be consistent as it is. We just don't know what that logic is. And so yeah, Link is warping around all over the place, and what ends the trick is actually the Hinox throwing him. The moment the Hinox throws Link, he is physically thrown where he currently is for half a heart of damage, and the warping stops. The trick ends. Now, Adamo talked earlier about how precise the trick is. It's estimated to be precise down to the millionth decimal place in Link's floating point coordinates in game. But there's also many other things which can affect the Hinox Warp other than just the obvious positioning. One, which is very strange, is mashing items. You actually have frames where you can use items during the Hinox Warp, and we know this because back in the D7 days, someone had the idea of mashing feather during a Hinox Warp, and they mashed the feather and they got a completely different result. And just to prove it, they did the same thing again, but mashed the ocarina, and what do you know? The ocarina, the camera zipped over to where Link is. You actually have frames to act during a Hinox Warp. And in that vein, holding directions is also considered to have some sort of influence, at least in certain cases. Medicine is also another thing which can affect the Hinox Warp, dying when you activate the Hinox Warp so that the duration you're warping is prolonged by the revival period because it freezes the Hinox in time, and so you continue to warp around for a longer period of time and thus end up in a different spot. But perhaps the most prevalent and most frustrating factor in a Hinox Warp is something called the Hinox throw angle, or more specifically, the Hinox rotation time. And we did not realize this until very late in the D7 days, and that's for a good reason that I'll get to later. But basically, if you are grabbed near a wall, to avoid having the Hinox throw you onto the wall or onto an object that is part of the room, or maybe even just for casual balance purposes, the game will choose a random angle from a consistent pool of angles and tell the Hinox to face that angle, which, if he's against a wall, is always going to be away from the wall. And as I said previously, the warping does not stop until the Hinox physically throws you. That is why medicine extends the warping duration. And depending on which angle is randomly chosen, the Hinox will take a greater or lesser amount of time to rotate around and reach that angle, meaning that Link will be warping for a greater or lesser amount of time. And thus, he can end up in a completely different spot because he's warping very large distances at a very rapid pace.
Now that we understand everything that we need to know about Hinox Warps, it's easy to see how D7 is a totally different beast than D8. D8 was much easier to keep consistent than D7, and this would be seen in how many hours were spent trying different angles and spots over and over. This trick would become so incredibly hard to test and lab out that some people, myself included, thought it would be an incredibly long time for a consistent setup to be discovered. As Kincaid explained earlier, everything was tried. Using a shield clank to Hinox Warp, falling into the pits to Hinox Warp, holding different directions, but nothing seemed to work. People even tried to Hinox Warp using the iron ball. However, this did not seem to do anything useful either. A month would pass and the community had communally spent hundreds of hours trying out various Hinox Warps for something that could even lead to getting to the instrument room. It was at this point that we really started to admire and be shocked by that original Hinox Warp discovery that led to all of this. After thousands and thousands of Hinox Warps done by the community, not one single person was able to recreate Drew Blank's warp and get into the instrument room. That was until just over a month later, on November 13th, when SixPathsPanda did this. This setup was unbelievable. It required 2 frame-perfect bomb arrows and precise positioning to pull off, and thus was unbelievably difficult. When you're working on a trick as precise as this, and have to pull off 2 frame-perfect 1/60th of a second inputs without a good visual cue, it's easy to see why, at the time, people were not satisfied with the difficulty and consistency of this setup. It was recreated by others, however, and was known to be possible only just a month after the discovery of the D2 Hinox Warp. Another setup was found only 2 days later by Kincaid and Captain Kiwi, which involved Hinox warping to the 3rd floor and then wrong warping to the 4th floor. This is what it looked like. While this setup was less precise than the double bomb arrow one, it relied on the Hinox throwing down right. It was still incredibly difficult to pull off, but at least we were making progress. A few days later, yet another setup was found by SixPathsPanda on November 17th, when he used the feather to mash during a Hinox warp in a certain spot, and was also warped to the instrument room. The issue with this setup, however, was that the feather mashing was inconsistent, as you had to mash incredibly fast, and also that since you were close to a wall, the Hinox rotation angle would be randomly chosen, and thus was down to RNG to pick the correct angle. This setup was not much better than the previous setup, however, it was something. The community would not give up. We knew there was crazy potential for time save in D7 if we could get something a bit more bearable, and so people kept on grinding and glitch hunting. We wouldn't have to wait much longer, however, since a week later, on November 24th, xIceBlue posted this video of a setup. It was incredible to see the evolution of the D7 setups happen in such quick succession. There was a whole month of testing done, while no one was able to get to the instrument room once. And then, within the span of a week and a half, we were able to find 4 completely different setups to get us there. The setup discovered on November 24th was not perfect. However, it was much better than the previous setups. I will let Kincaid explain what is unique about our current setup.
We now had to not only find a way to make the fireballs a non-problem, but we also had to find some way to end up in a 100% consistent position away from the wall. It's easy to be in the same spot when you're against the wall or in a corner, but being out in the middle of the room away from the wall in the exact same position every time while dodging fireballs is a completely different story. Not only that, but get this, when you enter the Hinox room and it plays that little short cutscene with the Hinox, you would think that Link's position, his coordinates, would be the same every time, right? Because you walk into the room and it makes Link walk a set distance forward. So if you just hugged a wall going into the room, you would rightfully assume that Link would be in the same spot every time. And he visually is, but in-game, his position is not consistent enough to yield the same results with a Hinox Warp over and over and over. And so we had to find some way to also make that consistent. And so to accomplish this towering list of feats in the magical nonsense witchcraft setup which we use currently, we bonk on the walls and the blocks outside the room, which for some reason just makes Link's X coordinate upon entry consistent enough that the Hinox Warp does the same thing every time. And then we shoot an arrow at the Hinox so he gets mad and throws a bomb, which gives us iframes to avoid getting hit and knocked back by the fireballs. And then finally, we fire a bomb arrow so that we can actually perform the warp. But there's a catch, because we are in iframes when we fire the bomb arrow, and the explosion hitbox is actually lingering, Link will get hit on the first frame possible once the iframes wear off. And so depending on when you fire the bomb arrow, you can actually get a variety of frames, not all of which are completely ideal. But the trick is 100% consistent, and that's the best setup we have currently. So, I hope you all enjoyed me talking about Hinox Warps. Thanks Adamo for having me in the video. And let's find Early Rooster.
Thank you, Kincaid, for the incredible explanations, and I too hope that we can find Early Rooster someday, which would give us access to the rooster much earlier on in the game, and would arguably be the most important discovery in the game's history. Regarding Hinox Warps, it was at this point that the community was unsure of how to proceed. While the D7 Hinox Warp saved a huge amount of time of around 8 minutes, it was still incredibly difficult to pull off. And of the 3 frames you are likely to hit, only one of them sends you to the final room, whereas the other 2 send you to right before the final boss, forcing you to waste time fighting him. This trick was so demoralizing that people actually started to lose interest in running any percent, as people would run through the entire game and then have to hope that they hit the exact frame to send them to the instrument room, as opposed to the boss rooms or somewhere else entirely. Due to this, a new category was actually created called Any Percent No Hinox Warp, which banned the use of Hinox Warps to add other outlets for runners to speedrun the game without the headache of D7 skip. In addition, this entire time, we had been calling the trick Super Hinox Throws, and it was at this time we decided that we should probably pick a more mature name for the trick, so that the category was not called Any Percent No Super Hinox Throw. New things are constantly being discovered in the Link's Awakening remake, and just this past week, a speedrunner by the name of Lime discovered that it was possible to Hinox Warp within Dompe's chamber dungeons, a very long and tedious process within 100%, where the runner must build dungeons and complete them as fast as possible. Using Hinox Warping is very strong here, because the dungeons are usually very long, and require the player to collect all of the chests in the dungeon for the boss key, which can now be totally skipped. The future is very bright for Link's Awakening, and for the short time it has been out, it already has an incredibly storied history. There is also a Hinox in the second dungeon of the game, but at the moment it is not yet theorized how we might be able to use it for a Hinox Warp, as we have extremely limited access to items at this point in the game. However, no one knows what the future holds, and one day it might very well be possible. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I want to give a special thanks to Kincaid, the human encyclopedia, for helping me research and create this video. I also want to thank everyone who poured tons and tons of hours onto this trick, and the people whose Twitter clips I used in the video. I will mention some of these amazing glitch hunters and runners now. SixPathsPanda, Kincaid, Samurai Man, Captain Kiwi 07, Leoetlino, Dream Sen, Prizna, Vesper, Nolan, TGH, xIceBlue, Miniretin, Ice, Mashy, Mr. Shasta, and EDL666. Without the help of these amazing runners, this trick would have taken much, much longer to understand and to discover. In addition to those who were not listed in the video, I want to thank everyone who's involved in the Link's Awakening community for actively making this game the best that it can be. The Link's Awakening Discord feels like a home to me, and everyone there is extremely friendly and helpful. If anyone has any interest in running the game, I would recommend you check out my Any% tutorial or B-Dude Games Any% Glitchless tutorial. Thank you all once again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.